Sterling Hayes adjusted his Patek Philippe watch as he settled into the plush leather booth at Azura, Chicago's most exclusive restaurant. The maitre d' had practically bowed when Sterling arrived, escorting him past the line of waiting patrons to his regular table overlooking the Chicago River. It was a perfect early summer evening, the kind that made the city feel alive with possibility. Golden hour sunlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting an almost ethereal glow across the minimalist decor that reportedly cost $8 million to design. "Your usual Mr. Hayes?" asked the sommelier, appearing silently at his side. "Not tonight, Marcel. Let's go with the 82 Chateau Margaux instead." Sterling's voice carried the easy confidence of someone accustomed to the best of everything. At 31, he was the youngest CEO in Horizon Ventures history, having built his AI security startup from his Northwestern dorm room to a valuation of over $4 billion in just 9 years. Sterling checked his watch again. Vivian was running late, which wasn't like her. Their relationship was still new, just 3 months. But punctuality was one of the qualities that had first attracted him to the art gallery director. That, and her ability to challenge him in ways few people dared. In the cutthroat world of tech ventures, most people either feared him or wanted something from him. Vivian seemed genuinely unimpressed by his wealth and status, which both irritated and fascinated him. His phone buzzed. A text from Vivian: "Cab stuck in traffic. 10 minutes away. Order me something strong." Sterling smiled and signaled the bartender. "Mezcal Negroni for the lady," he said before turning his attention back to the spectacular view. Chicago had been good to him. Very good. The city skyline before him represented a vertical scoreboard of his success. From the cramped apartment he'd shared with 3 roommates after dropping out of his MBA program to the penthouse he now owned on the top floor of the Spire. The bartender delivered Vivian's cocktail along with Sterling's whiskey neat. He took a sip, savoring the smoky complexity, and allowed himself a rare moment of contentment. The latest round of funding had closed yesterday. Another $200 million in capital to scale operations across Europe. The board was ecstatic. His personal stake in the company had just increased by roughly $40 million. Not bad for a kid from Springfield whose father had spent 30 years fixing furnaces and whose mother still used coupons at the grocery store. His parents. Sterling frowned slightly. He'd been avoiding his mother's calls lately. The success he'd achieved created an uncomfortable distance between them. They were proud, certainly, but they didn't understand his world, and their attempts to connect only highlighted the gulf between the person he'd been and the person he'd become. Sterling was pulled from his thoughts by movement at the restaurant's entrance. Vivian had arrived, drawing admiring glances as she made her way through the dining room. She wore a simple black dress that somehow looked more elegant than the designer outfits adorning the other female patrons. Her dark hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, showcasing the strong jawline and high cheekbones that gave her the look of a Renaissance painting come to life. "Sorry I'm late," she said, sliding into the booth. "My last appointment ran long, and then traffic was a nightmare." She leaned across the table and kissed him lightly on the lips before settling back and taking a sip of her cocktail. "Perfect. You remembered." "I remember everything about you," Sterling replied with a smirk. Vivian rolled her eyes. "Smooth, Hayes. Very smooth. How was your day? Did the board meeting go well?" Sterling launched into an abbreviated version of his triumph, watching Vivian's face for the expected look of awe. Instead, she listened thoughtfully, asking pointed questions about the investor's expectations and long-term strategy. This was their dynamic. She never simply stroked his ego, and he found her intellectual engagement more stimulating than simple adoration. "Enough about work," Sterling said after a few minutes. "I wanted to talk to you about Aspen next month. I've secured the private chalet, and we can have the jet ready whenever." "Mr. Hayes?" A small voice interrupted him. Sterling turned, ready to politely dismiss whoever had approached their table. Interruptions during dinner were not uncommon. People wanting to pitch ideas, journalists seeking comments, or simply fans of his frequent business magazine covers. But it wasn't an adult standing beside their table. It was a little girl, perhaps 10 years old, with blonde hair pulled into a slightly messy ponytail. She wore jeans and a purple t-shirt with some cartoon character Sterling didn't recognize. Nothing about her appearance suggested she belonged in a restaurant where entrees started at $60. "Mr. Hayes?" she repeated, her voice small but determined. Sterling glanced around, looking for a parent or guardian who might belong to this child. "Yes? Can I help you?" The girl took a deep breath, her small chest rising and falling with the effort of gathering courage. Her eyes, a striking blue that caught the light in an eerily familiar way, locked onto his. "My name is Mackenzie Walsh," she said, her voice suddenly steadier. "And I think you're my father." Time seemed to freeze. The ambient noise of the restaurant, the clink of silverware, the murmur of conversation, the soft piano music, all faded away. Sterling felt as though he'd been plunged into ice water, his body rigid with shock. Vivian's mouth opened slightly, her eyes darting between Sterling and the girl. What? Sterling managed to stammer out. "That's not. I don't." A woman appeared behind the girl, placing protective hands on her shoulders. She was in her mid-30s, conservatively dressed in a blouse and slacks that, while neat, had clearly not come from any high-end retailer. Her face was flushed with embarrassment, but her eyes, the same startling blue as the child's, held a steely resolve. "I'm sorry to interrupt your dinner," she said, her voice tight. "I'm Eliza Walsh. We need to talk, Sterling." Recognition hit him like a physical blow. Eliza. Eliza from Northwestern. Eliza from 11 years ago. Eliza from before everything changed. Before he became Sterling Hayes, tech wunderkind and venture capital darling. Other diners were beginning to notice the scene unfolding at his table. Sterling, always acutely aware of optics, quickly calculated his options. A scene would be disastrous. The last thing he needed was tech CEO confronted by love child, splashed across tomorrow's news sites. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private," he said, his CEO voice kicking in automatically, calm, controlled, solution-oriented. Vivian's expression had transformed from confusion to dawning comprehension. "Sterling?" Her voice carried a question he wasn't ready to answer. "I need a moment, Viv," he said, not meeting her eyes. He signaled to Marcel, who materialized instantly. "Please escort these guests to the private dining room. And bring my bill." As Marcel led Eliza and the girl and Mackenzie away, Sterling finally looked at Vivian. Her face was unreadable. "You should go," she said quietly. "We can talk later." Sterling nodded, grateful for her composure even as he recognized the conversation they would eventually have would be difficult. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket in an automatic gesture, and followed after Eliza and the child who claimed to be his daughter. The private dining room was small but luxurious, with sound-dampening walls and a single oak table. Eliza and Mackenzie sat on one side, both perched on the edges of their chairs like they might need to flee at any moment. Sterling took the chair opposite them, his mind racing through possibilities, calculations and damage control scenarios. "You look exactly the same," Eliza said, breaking the tense silence. There was no warmth in her voice, just a flat statement of fact. Sterling studied her face. She had aged, not dramatically, but the carefree college girl he remembered had been replaced by a woman with fine lines around her eyes and a weariness that spoke of struggle. "Eliza," he began, then stopped, unsure what to say. "This is unexpected." "Was it?" She arched an eyebrow. "When you disappeared after that night? When you changed your number? When you blocked me on everything? Did you think there might be consequences?" Sterling felt his face flush. Those had been different times before he had anything to lose. Before he became someone whose actions and associations were scrutinized. "I was 20 years old," he said defensively. "We barely knew each other." "Clearly we knew each other well enough," Eliza replied, nodding toward Mackenzie, who was studying Sterling with uncomfortable intensity. The girl's resemblance to him was undeniable now that he looked more closely. The shape of her eyes, the set of her jaw, even the way she held herself with a kind of contained energy, it was like looking at a feminine version of his childhood photos. "What do you want?" Sterling asked, his voice low. "Money? Is that it?" Eliza's face hardened. "Is that what you think of me? After all this time?" "I don't know what to think," Sterling snapped. "You show up at one of the most expensive restaurants in Chicago with a child I've never seen before and drop this bomb on me in the middle of a business dinner. What am I supposed to think?" "I didn't want to come here," Eliza said. "Believe me, this isn't how I wanted this to happen either." "Then why now? Why tonight?" Eliza hesitated, and for the first time, Sterling noticed the fatigue behind her anger. "Because Mackenzie found you," she said simply. "She's been looking. And once she knew, she wouldn't let it go." Sterling turned to the girl, who had remained silent during their exchange. "You were looking for me?" Mackenzie nodded, her ponytail bobbing. "I did a school project on DNA," she said. "And then I got curious about my dad. Mom always said he was someone she knew in college who moved away. So I started Googling her old college friends." She shrugged with the simple logic of childhood. Your picture is everywhere. And you have the same weird thumb as me. She held up her right hand, displaying a thumb that bent slightly outward at the top joint, a distinctive quirk Sterling had always considered his alone. That doesn't prove anything, Sterling said automatically, even as he curled his own distinctive thumb into his palm. We can do a test if you want, Mackenzie replied with surprising composure. Mom says that's your right. Sterling felt a flash of anger at being outmaneuvered by a 10-year-old. He turned back to Eliza. Fine. We'll do a paternity test. I'll have my lawyer contact you to arrange it. Now if you'll excuse me, I have to get back to my date. He stood, ready to escape this surreal situation, but Mackenzie's voice stopped him. Do you like being a CEO? She asked. The question was so unexpected, so innocent, that Sterling found himself answering before he could stop. Yes, I do. I want to run a company someday too, she said. I'm the best in my class at math. And I already made an app that helps kids organize their homework. It's not in the App Store or anything, but my friends all use it. Sterling felt something twist in his chest, a strange blend of discomfort and something that might, alarmingly, be pride. That's impressive, he said cautiously. She's been coding since she was 7, Eliza said, a hint of maternal pride breaking through her anger. Self-taught mostly. She's in all the advanced programs at school. Sterling looked between them, the reality of the situation beginning to sink in more deeply. If this child was his, and the mounting evidence suggested she might be, then his life was about to become vastly more complicated. I need time to process this, he said finally. And we need that test. But... He paused, looking at Mackenzie, who was watching him with those disconcertingly familiar eyes. If it turns out that I am your father, we'll figure something out. It wasn't much of a promise, but it was all he could offer in that moment, standing in the private dining room of a restaurant where a plate of pasta cost more than what Eliza probably made in a day, with his date waiting outside and his carefully constructed life threatening to unravel around him. As he turned to leave, Mackenzie spoke again. I knew you'd be tall, she said. I'm the tallest girl in my grade. Sterling paused, hand on the door. I was too, he said softly. The tallest in my class. Then, without another word, he pushed through the door and back into the restaurant, where Vivian waited, her expression a complex mixture of concern, confusion, and something else he couldn't quite identify. I need to go, he told her, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. I'll explain everything, I promise. But not tonight. Vivian studied his face for a long moment. Okay, she said finally. But Sterling? Whatever this is, don't run from it. Her words followed him as he left the restaurant, stepping out into the Chicago night that suddenly seemed less golden, less filled with possibility, and infinitely more complicated than it had just 1 hour before. Sterling's penthouse felt oppressively quiet as he paced across the polished concrete floors. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the glittering Chicago skyline, a view that normally calmed him, but tonight the lights seemed to mock his turmoil. He'd left Azura in a daze, declining his driver's services in favor of walking the 15 blocks home, hoping the night air would clear his head. It hadn't. He poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and downed it in one burning swallow. The encounter replayed in his mind with merciless clarity, the girl's determined expression, Eliza's accusing eyes, Vivian's confusion. The careful boundaries between his past and present had collapsed in an instant. Eliza. He hadn't allowed himself to think about her for years. They'd met in his sophomore year at Northwestern. She was a junior studying education, while he was already making waves with his early tech ventures. Their connection had been intense but brief. Just a few months of late-night conversations and stolen weekends before Sterling received his first significant investment offer. When he dropped out to focus on his company, he'd cut ties with virtually everyone from his university life, including Eliza. It hadn't seemed significant at the time, just another bridge burned in service to his ambition. Sterling's phone buzzed. Vivian. He let it go to voicemail. He wasn't ready to explain what he himself didn't fully understand. Instead, he pulled out his laptop and searched for Eliza Walsh Chicago. The results were sparse. A LinkedIn profile showing she taught 5th grade at a public school in Evanston, a few mentions in school newsletters, nothing extraordinary. No social media presence he could find. She had lived a quiet life, it seemed, while he had pursued the opposite. And Mackenzie. He typed her name but stopped before hitting search. What was he looking for? Proof? Disproof? The girl's resemblance to him was already unsettlingly clear. His doorbell rang, startling him. Sterling checked the security panel. Vivian. He considered not answering, but she'd already seen the light on, With a sigh, he buzzed her up. When the elevator doors opened directly into his penthouse, Vivian stepped out, still in her black dress from dinner. Her expression was unreadable. "I thought you might need company," she said, setting her purse down on the granite island that separated his kitchen from the living area. "Though I wasn't sure you'd let me in." Sterling poured her a glass of wine without asking. "I'm sorry about dinner," he said, his voice tight. "Is she yours?" Vivian asked directly, accepting the wine but not drinking it. "I don't know," Sterling answered honestly. "Maybe. Probably. We're going to do a test." "How old is she?" 10. Vivian did the math silently. "You would have been very young." 21. "It was my sophomore year of college." He paused. "Before everything. Before Horizon." "And her mother, Eliza? She never told you?" Sterling felt a flush of shame. "She couldn't. I changed my number, moved apartments. I was focused on the company. I didn't want distractions." "Distractions," Vivian repeated, her voice neutral but her eyes sharp. "Is that what you call a child?" "I didn't know about the child," Sterling snapped, then immediately regretted his tone. "I'm sorry. This is all just a lot to process." Vivian studied him over the rim of her wineglass. "What are you going to do?" It was the question he'd been avoiding since he left the restaurant. What would he do if the test confirmed what seemed increasingly obvious? What place could a 10-year-old girl and her schoolteacher mother possibly have in his meticulously crafted life? "I don't know," he admitted. "Pay child support, obviously. Set up a college fund. Whatever's appropriate." "Appropriate," Vivian echoed, and this time there was definite judgment in her tone. "And what about being her father? Is that part of what's appropriate?" Sterling turned away, facing the window. Chicago stretched before him, a city he had conquered through sheer force of will and ruthless focus. "I don't know how to be a father. I barely knew how to be a son." The admission hung in the air between them. Sterling rarely spoke about his childhood, the constant financial stress, his father's growing resentment at a life of servicing other people's comfort, his mother's quiet determination to give her only child more opportunities than they'd had. He'd remade himself so thoroughly that sometimes those memories felt like they belonged to someone else. "No one knows how to be a parent until they are one," Vivian said finally, her voice softer. "But that girl found you because she wanted to know you. That means something, Sterling." He turned back to face her. "You sound like you're taking their side." "There are no sides here. Just people. Complicated, messy people." She set down her wine. "Look, I'm not here to tell you what to do. But I know you, Sterling. Better than you think I do. You've spent your entire adult life in control of your company, your image, your narrative. This is something you can't control. And that terrifies you." Her accuracy stung. "So what's your advice then?" he asked, unable to keep the defensive edge from his voice. "Face it head on. Get the test. If she's yours, figure out what kind of relationship you want with her. And with her mother." "There is no relationship with her mother," Sterling said quickly. "That was over a decade ago. And yet here you are, connected for life if that girl is yours." Vivian gathered her purse. "I should go. You have a lot to think about and I don't think I'm helping." Sterling didn't protest. Part of him wanted her to stay, to help anchor him in the present while his past threatened to overtake everything. But a larger part needed solitude to recalibrate. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said as she stepped back into the elevator. Vivian nodded, but her eyes held doubt. "Good night, Sterling." After she left, Sterling found himself standing in his home office, staring at the wall of accolades that charted his meteoric rise, magazine covers hailing him as a visionary, awards for innovation, photographs with political leaders and tech legends. None of it offered any guidance for the situation he now faced. His phone buzzed with an incoming email. His lawyer, responding to the message Sterling had sent from the car. The subject line read, "Paternity test arrangements." Sterling hesitated, then opened it. His lawyer had already outlined a comprehensive plan, a discrete testing facility, an NDA for Eliza to sign, a preliminary draft of potential child support arrangements depending on the outcome. Everything was clinical, strategic, designed to minimize disruption to Sterling's life and reputation regardless of the results. It was exactly what Sterling had asked for. So why did it leave him feeling hollow? He closed the email without responding and pulled up his contacts instead. It took some scrolling to find the entry he was looking for: Mom. They spoke only sporadically now, holiday calls and occasional updates. Every conversation carried an undercurrent of distance that neither acknowledged directly. Before he could overthink it, Sterling hit call. His mother answered on the third ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Sterling? Is everything all right? It's nearly midnight." "I'm sorry to wake you, Mom," he said, suddenly feeling like a child again. I needed to talk to you." There was a rustling sound as his mother presumably sat up in bed. "What's wrong, honey? Is it the company?" "No, nothing like that." Sterling took a deep breath. "Mom, do you remember when I was in college? My sophomore year? I was dating a girl named Eliza for a while. The education major? Sweet girl, dark hair?" His mother's memory surprised him. He'd only mentioned Eliza in passing back then. "That's her. Mom, she found me today. She came to a restaurant where I was having dinner." He paused. "She had a little girl with her. 10 years old. She says I'm the father." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "Are you still there?" Sterling asked. "I'm here," his mother replied, her voice careful. "Are you asking me if it's possible?" Sterling closed his eyes. "I guess I am." "Then yes, Sterling. It's possible. You were seeing this girl around the time you got your first big investment. Right before you left school." Her voice softened. "You were so focused on your future then. On building something. You didn't talk much about your personal life." "I'm going to take a paternity test," Sterling said. "But Mom, she looks like me. She has my weird thumb. She's good at math and she's already coding and she's—" He broke off, emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "She sounds remarkable," his mother said gently. "Like her father." The simple statement hit Sterling with unexpected force. Her father. The concept was still so abstract, yet increasingly undeniable. "What do I do, Mom?" he asked, dropping into his office chair. "If she's mine, what am I supposed to do?" "What do you want to do?" his mother countered. Sterling hadn't considered that question. He'd been so caught up in damage control, in managing the disruption to his carefully constructed life, that he hadn't stopped to ask himself what he actually wanted. "I don't know," he admitted. "I never planned for this." "Some of the best things in life aren't planned, Sterling." There was a smile in his mother's voice now. "You of all people should know that. Wasn't it one of those unplanned coding sessions in your dorm room that led to your first breakthrough?" Sterling found himself smiling despite everything. "That's different." "Is it?" "Life doesn't follow business plans, honey. Sometimes it sends you in directions you never expected." She paused. "Do you want to know what I think?" "Yes," Sterling said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "I think you have a chance here. A chance to be part of something more important than any company or investment. A chance to know this girl, your daughter. And maybe a chance to be the kind of father yours couldn't always be." The mention of his father, a good man who had grown increasingly distant as Sterling's success highlighted the limitations of his own life, landed heavily. "I don't know if I can do it," Sterling confessed. "My life is complicated. I travel constantly. I work insane hours. How does a child fit into that?" "The same way anything important fits into our lives, we make room," his mother replied simply. "But Sterling, that's a decision only you can make. Just, don't make it from fear. Make it from love, either the love you think you could give this girl or the honest recognition that you can't. She deserves that much." They talked for a few more minutes, his mother asking gentle questions about Mackenzie, her name, what she was like, what Sterling had felt when he saw her. He found himself describing the girl's determination, her directness, the intelligence in her eyes. With each detail she became more real to him, less a problem to be solved and more a person to be known. After hanging up, Sterling walked to his bedroom and opened his closet. Behind the rows of custom suits and designer shoes was a storage bin he rarely accessed. He pulled it out and removed the lid, revealing mementos from his pre-fame life, his high school graduation tassel, early sketches of what would become Horizon's signature product, and a few photos from his brief college career. He rifled through them until he found what he was looking for, a group shot from a tech club social event. There, in the background, was Eliza, her arm around a younger version of himself, both laughing at something off camera. He hadn't remembered keeping this photo, but now it seemed significant that he had. Sterling studied his younger face, less polished, more open, his ambition not yet hardened into the calculated drive that would define his 20s. He barely recognized himself. He set the photo aside and pulled out his phone again, this time to respond to his lawyer's email. But instead of approving the proposed arrangements, Sterling typed a different message. "Hold off on the legal approach. I'd like to handle this more personally. We'll be in touch tomorrow with next steps." After sending it, Sterling felt something shift inside him. Not resolution exactly, but movement away from the defensive crouch he'd adopted since Mackenzie's announcement at Azura. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be dictated solely by legal strategy and image management. As he prepared for bed, a process that normally involved reviewing market reports and competitor analyses, Sterling instead found himself searching father-daughter relationships on his tablet. The results were overwhelming: advice columns, psychological studies, personal essays from both fathers and daughters. He clicked on one titled, "Getting to Know Your Child After Absence," and began to read. Outside his window, Chicago continued its restless nighttime rhythm, indifferent to the personal earthquake reshaping Sterling Hayes' carefully constructed world. For the first time in years, the city's endless ambition and opportunity seemed less important than the simple, terrifying possibility taking shape in his mind, that somewhere across town, a 10-year-old girl with his eyes and his unusual thumb might be lying awake too, wondering about the father she had finally found. 3 days after the encounter at Azura, Sterling found himself driving through unfamiliar streets in Evanston, a suburb just north of Chicago. He had declined his usual driver, preferring to make this particular journey alone. His Tesla seemed conspicuously luxurious among the modest homes and practical family vehicles that lined the residential neighborhood. The paternity test results had arrived that morning via secure email. Sterling had stared at the document for a full 30 minutes before opening it, though the results merely confirmed what he had already come to accept. Mackenzie Walsh was, without question, his biological daughter. The DNA match was 99.997% certain. Sterling pulled up to the address Eliza had provided, a small but well-maintained bungalow with window boxes full of geraniums and a basketball hoop mounted above the garage. He sat in his car for several minutes, gathering his courage. In the passenger seat lay a gift bag containing a laptop. Not just any laptop, but a customized high-performance model preloaded with premium coding software. It had seemed appropriate for a girl who created her own homework app, though now, looking at the modest home, Sterling wondered if the gift might come across as ostentatious. Too late to reconsider. Eliza had spotted him through the window. She appeared at the front door, arms crossed, watching as he collected the gift bag and made his way up the stone path to her home. "You didn't have to bring anything," she said by way of greeting. "It seemed appropriate," Sterling replied, suddenly feeling awkward despite his usual social confidence. "May I come in?" Eliza stepped aside, allowing him into a living room that was comfortably lived in, books stacked on side tables, a science fair project half assembled on the dining table visible through an archway, family photos arranged on the mantel. It couldn't have been more different from Sterling's minimalist penthouse. "Is she here?" Sterling asked, setting the gift bag down carefully. "Soccer practice. She'll be home in about an hour." Eliza gestured toward the kitchen. "Coffee?" Sterling nodded, following her into a kitchen that was small but efficient. He watched as she moved through the familiar routine of measuring grounds and filling the pot. There was an ease to her movements that spoke of contentment with her surroundings, despite their modest nature. "I got the results," Sterling said finally. "And?" Eliza didn't turn from the coffee maker. "You know what they say. She's mine." The words felt strange in his mouth, foreign yet undeniable. Eliza turned to face him, leaning against the counter. "I never doubted it. I wouldn't have brought her to you if I wasn't certain. Why didn't you find me sooner?" The question had been bothering Sterling since their meeting at the restaurant. "You must have known who I was, what I became. It wouldn't have been hard to track me down." Eliza poured the coffee into 2 mugs, neither matching, both clearly chosen for function rather than aesthetics. "I considered it," she admitted, sliding one mug toward him. "When I found out I was pregnant, I tried calling you, but your number was already disconnected. I went to your apartment, but you'd moved. By then you'd dropped out and no one seemed to know how to reach you. But later," Sterling pressed. "Once Horizon took off. Once I was in the public eye. By then I had made a life for us." Eliza's voice was steady. "My parents helped me finish school. I got my teaching certification. We were okay, Sterling. We didn't need a reluctant father or your money. Then why now?" Eliza's expression softened slightly. "Like I told you at the restaurant, it was Mackenzie. She's always been curious about you, but in an abstract way. Until that science project on genetics. Something clicked for her then. She became determined to find you." A small, proud smile touched her lips. "She's stubborn. Like both her parents, I guess." Sterling sipped his coffee, trying to absorb everything. "The article she mentioned, about my company. That's how she found me." Eliza nodded. "She saw your picture and recognized something of herself in you?" Then she started researching, cross-referencing the timeline with when we knew each other. She's frighteningly methodical for a 10-year-old. She paused. When she showed me the evidence she'd compiled, I couldn't deny it anymore. I couldn't keep you from her. Thank you, Sterling said quietly, for not keeping her from me. You would have been justified. Eliza looked genuinely surprised at his words. You've changed. Have I? The question felt weightier than Sterling had intended. The Sterling Hayes I knew wouldn't have admitted I might be justified in anything that opposed his interests. She studied him over her coffee mug. So, now that you know for certain, what happens next? It was the same question Vivian had asked, the same question he'd been asking himself for 3 sleepless nights. Sterling had rehearsed his answer repeatedly on the drive over, but now the carefully prepared words abandoned him. I want to know her, he said simply. I want to be part of her life if you'll allow it. If she wants it. Eliza's expression remained cautious. As what, exactly? The fun weekend dad who swoops in with expensive gifts and exciting outings, then disappears back to his real life. Sterling felt a flicker of the old irritation at being challenged. That's not fair. You can't expect me to know exactly what kind of father I'll be before I've had a chance to try. No, but I need to know your intentions, Eliza countered. Mackenzie is smart and resilient, but she's still a child. If you're going to be in her life, it needs to be consistent. She doesn't need a novelty, she needs a parent. Before Sterling could respond, the front door opened, and the sound of sneakers on hardwood announced Mackenzie's arrival. Mom? Coach Ryan says I'm starting as midfielder next game. Her voice preceded her into the kitchen, where she stopped abruptly at the sight of Sterling. Her soccer uniform was grass-stained, her ponytail even messier than it had been at the restaurant, but her eyes, his eyes, lit up with unmistakable excitement. You came, she said, her voice hushed with something like awe. Sterling found himself smiling. I did. An awkward silence followed as none of them seemed to know the proper protocol for this unprecedented situation. I brought you something, Sterling finally said, gesturing toward the gift bag in the living room. Mackenzie looked to her mother for permission, which Eliza granted with a small nod. The girl walked to the bag with measured steps, trying and failing to contain her excitement. When she pulled out the laptop, her eyes widened. This is the ZX 9000, she breathed. It has 64 gigs of RAM and dual processors. You know your tech, Sterling observed, impressed. I read all the reviews when it came out. Wired said it's the best development machine on the market. She looked up at him, clutching the laptop. Thank you. Open it, Sterling encouraged. It's got some special features. Mackenzie settled on the couch and opened the laptop, gasping as it powered on. It has the full Horizon development suite. This costs like $1,000. I know a guy, Sterling said with a small smile, settling beside her at a careful distance. For the next 20 minutes, he guided her through the custom setup he'd arranged, showing her features that would help with her app development. Mackenzie absorbed everything with remarkable focus, asking insightful questions that revealed her genuine aptitude for technology. Sterling found himself explaining concepts he'd normally reserve for new engineering hires, and Mackenzie kept pace effortlessly. Eliza watched from the doorway, her expression a complex mixture of caution and something softer, perhaps hope. You really made an app for homework organization? Sterling asked as Mackenzie explored the development environment. She nodded, suddenly shy. It's pretty basic. Just helps keep track of assignments and study schedules. My friends use it though. Can I see it? Mackenzie hesitated, then pulled out her phone, a basic model at least 2 generations old. She opened an app with a simple but functional interface. You coded this yourself? Sterling couldn't keep the pride from his voice. Mostly. Ms. Peterson, she runs the coding club at school, helped with some of the database stuff. Mackenzie scrolled through the app's features. I want to add reminders next, but I'm still figuring out how to make the notifications work right. I could help with that, Sterling offered, then glanced at Eliza, unsure if he was overstepping. She gave a small nod of approval. Really? Mackenzie's face lit up. That would be awesome. The conversation flowed more easily after that, centered on coding and technology, safe, neutral territory where their shared aptitude created a natural bridge. Sterling found himself relaxing, genuinely enjoying Mackenzie's enthusiasm and quick mind. Eventually, Eliza cleared her throat. Mackenzie, why don't you go clean up before dinner? You're tracking half the soccer field through the house. Can Sterling stay for dinner? Mackenzie asked, using his first name with childish directness. Sterling and Eliza exchanged a look. If he'd like to, Eliza said carefully. I'd be honored, Sterling replied, surprising himself with how much he meant it. After Mackenzie bounded upstairs, Eliza sank into an armchair across from Sterling. She likes you, she said simply. She's amazing, Sterling replied. You've done an incredible job with her. She makes it easy. Most of the time. Eliza's smile was tired but genuine. She's always been special, curious, determined, smarter than is sometimes convenient. Like figuring out who her father is through genetic detective work, Sterling observed. Exactly like that. Eliza's expression grew serious. Look, Sterling, I meant what I said before. If you're going to be in her life, it needs to be real. Not just when it's convenient or when you're between business trips. I understand that, Sterling said. And I want to try. I really do. But you have to understand, my life is complicated. I can't promise I'll never miss a soccer game or a school event. What I can promise is that I'll do my best to be consistently present, in whatever way makes sense for her. For all of us. Eliza studied him for a long moment. That's actually more reasonable than I expected. I'm occasionally reasonable, Sterling said with a small smile. Contrary to what my board of directors might tell you. A hint of their old rapport flickered between them, not romantic, but the easy understanding that had drawn them together years ago. There's something else we need to discuss, Eliza said, her tone shifting to something more businesslike. Logistics. Child support. Legal arrangements. Sterling nodded. My lawyer prepared some options, but I'd rather hear what you think is fair before I share those. I don't need your money for myself, Eliza said firmly. I make a good living. Not tech CEO money, obviously, but enough. For Mackenzie, though. She hesitated. College will be expensive. And she'll need opportunities one can't always provide, advanced tech camps, maybe a better computer than what I could afford before today. Consider it done, Sterling said immediately. Whatever she needs. And college is absolutely covered. I can set up a trust fund immediately. This isn't about buying your way into her life, Eliza warned. I know that, Sterling replied, working to keep defensiveness from his tone. But denying her opportunities one can easily provide just to prove some point wouldn't be fair to her either. Eliza seemed to consider this, then nodded slowly. All right. We can work out the details later. For now. She glanced toward the stairs, where the sound of the shower running indicated Mackenzie was still cleaning up. For now, let's just get through dinner. The meal was simple, baked chicken, roasted vegetables, store-bought rolls. But to Sterling, accustomed to restaurants where foams and reductions decorated every plate, it was revelatory in its straightforward comfort. They ate at a small kitchen table, Mackenzie dominating the conversation with questions about Sterling's company, his coding background, and whether he thought her app could ever be in the App Store. With some refinement, absolutely, Sterling told her. The core idea is solid. Users need something simpler than the bloated education apps on the market. That's what I told Mom. Mackenzie exclaimed. All the school-approved apps have too many features nobody uses. You identified a market inefficiency, Sterling said, using the same language he would with his product team. That's the first step to creating something valuable. Mackenzie beamed at the validation, while Eliza shook her head with good-humored resignation. Great, now she'll never stop coding. Worse things could happen, Sterling said, catching Eliza's eye with an unspoken understanding. They both recognized Mackenzie's gift and the doors it could open for her. After dinner, while Mackenzie loaded the dishwasher, a chore she performed with minimal complaint, Sterling and Eliza stepped onto the small back porch. The evening air was cool, the suburban quiet a stark contrast to the constant hum of downtown Chicago. This went better than I expected, Eliza admitted, wrapping her cardigan tighter around herself. For me too, Sterling agreed. Though I'm not sure what I expected. Where's your girlfriend? The woman from the restaurant? Eliza asked, changing subjects with characteristic directness. Vivian. Sterling hesitated. She's giving me space to figure this out. We're still talking, but she understands this is complicated. Is she okay with all this? With Mackenzie? The question made Sterling realize he wasn't entirely sure. Vivian had been supportive but distant since the night at Azura. I think so. She's the one who encouraged me to come here, to try to be part of Mackenzie's life. She sounds wise, Eliza observed. She is. Sterling paused. What about you? Is there someone in your life? Eliza shook her head. Not currently. I dated a physics teacher from my school for a while last year, but it didn't work out. Between teaching and Mackenzie, there hasn't been much time for relationships. Sterling felt a twinge of guilt at the sacrifices Eliza had made while he had pursued his ambitions unencumbered. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "for not being there. For making everything harder for you." "Don't," Eliza said firmly. "I made my choices too. And look what came of them." She nodded toward the kitchen window, where they could see Mackenzie carefully arranging glasses in the dishwasher. "I wouldn't change a thing if it meant not having her." Sterling nodded, understanding completely despite having known Mackenzie for mere hours. Already the idea of a world without her in it seemed wrong somehow. "So where do we go from here?" Eliza asked. "Baby steps," Sterling suggested. "Maybe I could come to her soccer game this weekend? And perhaps she could visit me downtown sometimes, see the office, get a feel for what I do." "She'd love that," Eliza agreed. "The soccer game is Saturday at 10. Ridgewood Park, Field 3. "I'll be there," Sterling promised. Then, after a moment's hesitation, "What do we tell people?" "About who I am to her." "The truth," Eliza said simply. "That you're her father. That you've been away but now you're getting to know each other. Kids are surprisingly adaptable, Sterling. It's adults who make things complicated." Inside they found Mackenzie waiting expectantly, the dishwasher humming in the background. "Are you leaving?" she asked Sterling, trying to hide her disappointment. "I should get back to the city," he said gently. "But I'll be at your soccer game on Saturday. And maybe next week you could come see my office? There's a whole development floor I think you'd find interesting." "Really?" Her face brightened instantly. "Could I see the Horizon security systems?" "VIP tour," Sterling promised. "But only if your mom says it's okay." Mackenzie turned pleading eyes to Eliza, who laughed. "If your homework's done and your room is clean, yes." The goodbye was awkward, none of them quite sure of the proper protocol. A handshake seemed too formal, a hug too presumptuous. Sterling settled for a smile and a promise to text Eliza with details about Saturday. As he turned to leave, Mackenzie called after him. "Wait, I almost forgot." She ran upstairs and returned moments later with a small, worn notebook. "These are my ideas for app upgrades. Could you, maybe look at them? Tell me what you think." Sterling accepted the notebook, touched by the gesture and the trust it represented. "I'd be honored," he said, tucking it carefully into his jacket pocket. "I'll bring it on Saturday with my notes." As he drove back toward the city, the Chicago skyline gradually taking shape against the darkening sky, Sterling felt something unfamiliar settle over him. Not the sharp thrill of closing a deal or the satisfaction of a product launch, but something quieter and more profound. The notebook in his pocket felt weightier than its physical dimensions suggested, a tangible connection to a daughter he hadn't known existed days ago, but who now seemed an undeniable part of his future. His phone rang through the car's speaker system. "Vivian." "Hey," he answered, realizing he'd been so absorbed in the evening with Mackenzie and Eliza that he'd forgotten their planned call. "How did it go?" Vivian asked without preamble. "Good. Really good, actually." Sterling found himself smiling as he merged onto the highway. "She's extraordinary, Viv. Smart, curious, already coding her own apps. And she has my weird thumb." Vivian's laugh was warm through the speakers. "So you're a father. How does it feel?" The question stopped Sterling short. "Father." The word still felt foreign yet increasingly right. "Terrifying," he admitted. "But also, I don't know. Like something that was missing suddenly isn't anymore." "I'm happy for you," Vivian said, though Sterling detected a note of uncertainty beneath her words. "What about us?" he asked, finally addressing the question that had hovered between them since the night at Azura. "Does this change things?" Vivian was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I care about you, Sterling. But this is a big adjustment for all of us. Your life is going to change in ways we can't predict." "Will you meet her?" Sterling asked. "Not right away but soon? I think you'd like each other." "I'd like that," Vivian said, and Sterling could hear the smile in her voice. "Let's take it one step at a time though, okay? You're just getting to know her yourself." As Sterling pulled into the underground garage of his building, he realized he'd made more concrete plans in the past few hours than he typically made outside of work in a month. A soccer game, an office visit, reviewing Mackenzie's notebook. His carefully controlled schedule was already bending to accommodate this new reality. "I should go," he told Vivian. "I have some reading to do." His hand drifted to the notebook in his pocket. "Call me tomorrow?" "Absolutely," Sterling promised, though his mind was already drifting to Mackenzie's ideas, wondering what insights his daughter might have captured in her careful handwriting, what potential might be waiting to be nurtured. Later, sitting in his home office with Mackenzie's notebook open before him, Sterling was struck by how quickly priorities could shift. The quarterly projections that had consumed him days ago now seemed less urgent compared to the earnest app designs sketched in colored pencil on ruled paper. As he began to make notes in the margins, gentle suggestions and encouraging observations, Sterling realized he was approaching a crossroads. The path forward would require him to reconcile parts of himself that had long seemed incompatible: the ruthlessly efficient CEO and the newly discovered father, the man who had spent a decade outrunning his past and the man who now needed to embrace it to move forward. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But as he carefully annotated his daughter's work, Sterling Hayes felt, for perhaps the first time since founding Horizon Ventures, that success might be measured in ways he had never before considered. If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories/videos we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. 6 months transformed Sterling's life completely. Soccer games on Saturday mornings and Tuesday code nights at Eliza's became fixtures in his calendar. Mackenzie's app, now called Study Buddy, had launched in the App Store, a milestone that brought Sterling more pride than any business achievement. His relationship with Eliza evolved into respectful co-parenting, while his connection with Vivian deepened as she formed her own bond with Mackenzie. The penthouse that had once been Sterling's solitary domain now featured a teal-colored bedroom with dual monitors for coding and shelves lined with fantasy novels. Today marked Mackenzie's first overnight stay. Sterling found Vivian arranging flowers in the kitchen when he arrived home. "Is everything ready?" he asked nervously. "Relax," she laughed. "The room is perfect. You've checked her code module 6 times. She just wants to be with you." When Mackenzie arrived, she eagerly showed Eliza her new room before her mother departed. The evening unfolded naturally: pizza, coding on Study Buddy's calendar integration feature, and a movie that Sterling barely watched, too absorbed in observing his daughter's comfort in his home. When his phone buzzed with a message about urgent merger documents, Sterling silenced it without hesitation. 6 months ago he would have excused himself immediately. Later, after Mackenzie went to video chat with a friend, Vivian curled against Sterling on the balcony. "You're different," she observed. "Calmer. More present. Happier." Adding more responsibility should have made life more stressful, not less, Sterling reflected. "It's not about responsibilities," Vivian replied. "It's about priorities. You've finally found something more important than Horizon." "Not more important," Sterling corrected. "Just equally important in a different way." The next morning, Sterling found Mackenzie gazing out his floor-to-ceiling windows at the city below. "That building will be the new tech incubator," Sterling explained, pointing to a tower under construction. "Young developers can get resources to build the next big thing." "Could kids apply too?" Mackenzie asked thoughtfully. "We should create a youth division," Sterling realized. "Give talented kids access to tools and mentorship. You could help design it." Later, during a weekend tour of Horizon's headquarters, Sterling saw his company differently, not just as his achievement, but as a platform for future innovators like his daughter. "Dad," Mackenzie called across the room. The word still gave Sterling a jolt of pleasure. "Could I show Study Buddy to your development team sometime?" "Absolutely," Sterling replied. "They'll be impressed. It's more intuitive than half the apps we develop here." That evening, driving Mackenzie home, Sterling reflected on the past months. "I'm glad you found me," he said suddenly. "Me too," Mackenzie replied. "Mom says it was brave of you to try being a dad when you didn't have to." "I think it would have been braver to do it from the beginning," Sterling admitted. "Like your mom did." "But you're doing it now," Mackenzie said simply. "That's what matters." At Eliza's house, Sterling confirmed their next code night and hugged Mackenzie goodbye. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "Not just for the coding. For everything." "I'm proud of you too," she whispered back. The words caught Sterling off guard. All his achievements, the billions, awards, magazine covers, paled compared to earning this child's respect. Before leaving, Sterling proposed that Eliza consult on the Youth Coding Initiative. "With your teaching background, you'd bring perspective the tech people don't have." Driving back, Sterling took a brief call about merger documents but kept it short, promising to review them the next day. "And Shin? I want to discuss a new initiative Monday, a coding academy for young developers. I think it could change how we approach talent acquisition long-term." At home, Sterling found Vivian waiting. "I've been thinking about the future," he told her. "Specifically ours. I want you to know that Mackenzie isn't the only person I'm committed to." "I know," Vivian smiled. "It's one of the reasons I love you, your capacity for commitment once you decide something matters." "I love you too," Sterling replied, the words coming easily now. Later that night, Sterling stood at his window looking out at the city. His ambitions hadn't diminished, but they had expanded to include things no business plan could quantify: a daughter's smile, a respectful co-parenting relationship, a partnership based on understanding. In the reflection, Sterling saw not just the entrepreneur he'd spent years becoming, but also the father he was learning to be, imperfect but committed to the journey. The unexpected encounter that had upended his life had revealed a simple truth. Real wealth wasn't measured by what you accumulated, but by who you became through what you gave. In opening his life to the daughter he hadn't known he needed, Sterling had gained the one thing his billions could never buy: a chance to become not just successful, but truly rich in all the ways that mattered. If you enjoyed this video and want more content like this, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support means the world to us. If you'd like to help support the channel even more, you can use the Super Thanks feature right here on YouTube. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you thought about Sterling and Mackenzie's journey. Thanks for watching.